Singapore is now ranked the richest country in the world. By most conventional measures, this is accurate. GDP per capita is among the highest globally. Fiscal reserves are strong. Infrastructure functions efficiently. Yet when you spend time on the ground, speaking with hawkers, taxi drivers, young couples, retrenched PMETs or elderly cleaners, a different picture often emerges. Not one of destitution, but one of constant pressure. Housing prices continue to rise. Rents have increased. Food and healthcare costs are higher than they were a decade ago. Job security feels less predictable, especially for mid-career workers. This leads to an uncomfortable but important observation. Economic growth and lived experience do not always move in the same direction. GDP measures output. It does not measure affordability. It does not pay a mortgage. It does not lower grocery bills. And it does not guarantee employment stability. As Singapore has attracted increasing amounts of global wealth, including billionaire family offices, asset prices have risen significantly. This raises a neutral systems-level question. Who benefits most when growth is driven primarily by capital inflows and asset appreciation? For many everyday Singaporeans, the gains are not immediately visible. Hawkers face higher rental costs. Young couples delay home ownership. Mid-career, professionals worry about retrenchment in a more competitive labor market. Family offices and ultra-high net worth investors primarily park capital and purchase assets. They contribute to balance sheets and tax receipts. But they do not typically create large numbers of middle-income jobs, raise median wages, or directly reduce the cost of living. This does not make the strategy wrong, but it does make its limitations worth examining. A country's wealth cannot be assessed solely by rankings or headline figures. True prosperity is reflected in stability, opportunity, and the ability for ordinary citizens to plan their futures with confidence. Singaporeans were long told that economic growth would translate into a better quality of life over time. For many today, the question is not whether Singapore is rich, but whether that richness is being experienced broadly enough. If Singapore is the richest country in the world, what would it take for more citizens to genuinely feel it? When people talk about rising costs in Singapore, it rarely shows up as crisis. It shows up as adjustment. A hawker described how, after rent, utilities, and supplies, more than half of his monthly revenue is already committed before he takes home a salary. The stall remains viable, but saving for the future has become increasingly difficult. A taxi driver explained that compared to 10 years ago, he now works longer hours to achieve roughly the same take-home income, largely due to higher operating costs. The work still pays, it just pays differently. A young professional couple shared that their initial plan to upgrade has shifted. After several years of searching for a two-bedroom flat, their focus is no longer on progression, but on securing something manageable within their means. A mid-career PMET, who was recently retrenched, spoke less about unemployment and more about re-entry. The concern was whether the next role would match previous pay or require a reset in expectations. Individually, these are manageable situations. Collectively, they describe a broader shift. People are not collapsing, but they are recalibrating. That recalibration, from growth to maintenance, from optimism to caution, is difficult to capture in GDP figures, but increasingly common in everyday conversations. To understand why this gap exists, it helps to look at how Singapore's economic model actually functions. Singapore is a small, open city-state with no natural resources. Its success has always depended on attracting external capital, global talent, and multinational businesses. For decades, this model worked exceptionally well. Foreign investment created jobs. Jobs raised incomes. Rising incomes supported home ownership and upward mobility. But as Singapore became more successful, the dynamics changed. In recent years, a growing share of inflows has taken the form of capital rather than employment. This includes private wealth, investment funds, and family offices seeking stability, rule of law, and a safe place to park assets. Capital of this kind behaves differently. It does not require large local workforces. It tends to flow into property, equities, and financial instruments. And it raises asset prices faster than wages. For households that already own assets, this can be beneficial. For those still trying to enter the market, it raises the barrier. At the same time, Singapore operates in a highly competitive global labor market. Companies optimize for efficiency. Automation increases productivity without increasing headcount, and mid-level roles face pressure from both technology and lower-cost talent. None of this is unique to Singapore. Similar patterns can be observed in cities like Hong Kong, London, and parts of Switzerland. The result is not economic failure. It is a decoupling. Headline growth continues, while everyday advancement becomes harder to feel. This is why it is possible for a country to rank as extremely wealthy, while many citizens experience life as increasingly tight and carefully managed. Not because the system is broken, but because it is optimized for outcomes that do not always align with lived experience. When an economy continues to grow, but advancement becomes harder to feel, the effects are subtle. They do not show up as crisis. They show up as behavior. People become more cautious. Financial decisions are delayed. Risk-taking decreases, even among highly educated professionals. Homeownership shifts from a milestone to a source of anxiety. Career choices prioritize stability over experimentation. Savings are preserved, not invested in aspiration. Over time, this changes how a society relates to work. Jobs are no longer primarily a path to growth, but a means of maintaining position. Progress becomes incremental. Downward mobility feels more plausible than upward mobility. This also affects how success is perceived. When asset ownership matters more than income progression, outcomes depend increasingly on timing and inheritance, rather than effort alone. Those who entered the market earlier benefit. Those who arrive later face steeper entry costs. None of this implies unfairness, but it does alter incentives. A system optimized for stability and capital preservation naturally produces predictability, and predictability reduces dynamism. Creativity becomes riskier. Entrepreneurship narrows. The definition of a good career becomes more conservative. At a societal level, this creates a quiet tension. The country remains safe, efficient, and wealthy. Yet personal ambition becomes more carefully managed. People are not asking for less stability. They are asking whether stability alone is enough. And this is where the conversation shifts. Not toward dissatisfaction, but toward a deeper question of meaning. Singapore is, by many measures, an extraordinary success. It is safe, it is stable, it is efficient, and it is undeniably wealthy. The question, then, is not whether the system works. It is what the system is optimized for. GDP tells us how much an economy produces. Asset prices tell us where capital flows. But neither fully captures how life is experienced by ordinary citizens over time. Prosperity in a modern city-state may need to be measured differently, not only by output, but by whether effort still leads to progress, whether stability allows for ambition, and whether the next generation can reasonably expect to do better than the last. Singapore has always been willing to ask difficult questions early. This may be one of them. If we are the richest country in the world, what would it take for that wealth to feel broadly shared, not just secure, but meaningful?